All right, so I think we have everyone now with us. So once again, hello, namaste, good morning to Brazil, good afternoon to India. Thank you very much all for joining here today, our event, the exchange experience, the results of tax reform in India and the perspective for the Brazilian one. This is an event organized by the India-Brazil Chamber of Commerce with the technical partnership of the law firm Siqueira Castro Advogados, Brazilian associate of the India-Brazil Chamber of Commerce, and also with the technical knowledge of and partnership of the Indian firm Chadda Co. So it is a great pleasure to count with your participation here today. I'm just gonna ask everyone to mute the microphones so we don't have interruptions.
Mas você não tem outro celular, não?
Eu vou ligar ele hoje, ver se tem um número lá, que eu vou ter que estar no WhatsApp, tá?
Tenta lá.
Sorry for the interruptions, everyone. I'm going to ask everyone to please, if you're not speaking, mute your microphone, okay? So we avoid interruption during the event. So as I was saying, I would like to thank you very much, Siqueira Castro Advogados and Chadda Co. for contributing to this event today. Your participation is fundamental for the discussions. So thank you very much on the person of Mr. Raul Chadda and Mr. Agarwal that are here with us from Chadda Co. And also Dr. Carlos Siqueira Castro and Dr. Mausi Fregonesi that are here with us today. Thank you very much. And also, of course, I would like to thank you the presence of His Excellency, Ambassador of India to Brazil, Ambassador Suresh Reddy. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for being with us here today. And before we formally start the event, I just would like to go over a few information for everyone. So just reinforcing, please keep your microphones off if you're not speaking. And our speakers will have the cameras on the whole time. And I would like to let you know that we have simultaneous translation during the event. So if you'd like to use that option, either on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you have the simultaneous interpretation and you can choose the channel, Portuguese or in English. And in your phone, if you're accessing through a mobile phone, in the more options, you can find the simultaneous translation as well. So moving on, I just would like to let everyone know that this event is being recorded for its simultaneous transmission on YouTube and for internal consultation of IBCC as well. So just before we start, I just would like to let you know that what is the program today. So we're going to start our opening speech with Mr. Leonardo Ananda, President of the India-Brazil Chamber of Commerce and also Honorary Consul General of India in Rio de Janeiro. Then His Excellency, Ambassador of India to Brazil, Mr. Suresh Reddy, will be giving his opening speech. Then we're going to hear our technical speakers today. So we're going to start with the Indian side. Mr. Raul Chadda and Mr. Chitranjan Agarwal will be giving explanation and insights about the Indian tax reform. And on the Brazilian side, we'll have Mr. Mausi Fregonesi bringing the perspectives for the reform in Brazil. And after those two sessions on the Indian and the Brazilian side, we're going to have Mr. Adler Martins, legal advisor of the India-Brazil Chamber of Commerce, moderating our Q&A session, okay? And you'll be able to share your questions through the chat. Our team will be looking for your questions through the chat, so please feel free to interact there. So for our start, I would like to call Mr. Leonardo Ananda for his speech. Leonardo, can you hear us?
Yes. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you very much. Namaste to all. Good morning to all the Brazilians. Good afternoon to all my Indian friends. As we have a translation service, I'm going to speak in my mother language. So, and I would like just to welcome everybody to this very important event. So, let's change for Portuguese. Primeiramente, gostaria de agradecer imensamente a presença do nosso excelentíssimo embaixador da Índia no Brasil, Suresh Reddy, por mais uma vez estar prestigiando este importante evento da Câmara de Comércio Índia-Brasil, em parceria com a Siqueira Castro Advogados e a Chadda Co. Muito obrigado, embaixador. O embaixador tem realizado um trabalho espetacular de promoção da Índia no Brasil, conversando sempre com as pessoas certas, com as autoridades certas, com os verdadeiros formadores de opinião e tomadores de decisão aqui no Brasil, e realmente divulgando a Índia da forma correta, né, e divulgando esse grande potencial de fortalecimento, de união entre as duas nações, Brasil e Índia. Muito obrigado, embaixador, pelo trabalho que Vossa Excelência vem realizando, mas também por nos prestigiar e estar presente aqui no evento. Não posso deixar também de cumprimentar meu amigo Dr. Siqueira Castro, que também participou aí da formulação deste evento e entrou de parceria nesse evento, está aqui conosco, e enviou o seu grande advogado, o doutor Malcir, para estar aqui conosco, participando como painelista nesse importante evento. E, claro, também o doutor Chadda e o doutor Agarwal, que está iniciando uma bela parceria com a Câmara de Comércio Índia-Brasil. Obrigado pela presença de todos. E também do nosso assessor jurídico, doutor Adler, que vai moderar o debate no final. E, em nome da Natália Rodrigues, agradecer toda a equipe da Câmara de Comércio Índia-Brasil, que trabalhou muito aí para organizar mais um importante evento. Nós estamos gravando este evento porque, assim como o embaixador concorda comigo, um dos principais desafios da relação Índia-Brasil é justamente o desconhecimento. E a gente precisa não só divulgar o potencial dessa relação, mas gerar bons conteúdos, gerar conteúdos realmente fidedignos que possam ser utilizados para o fomento dessa relação. Então, com certeza também vamos divulgar depois este evento, este importante conteúdo para todos aqueles que pretendem nos auxiliar e participar ativamente da relação Índia-Brasil. Muito obrigado a todos e desejo um excelente evento. Namastê.
Muito obrigada, Leonardo. Muito obrigada. Now, I would like to call His Excellency, Ambassador Suresh Reddy, for his opening speech. Your Excellency, can you hear us?
Thank you, Natalia. I think it's a wonderful event which is happening today. So I'd like to really compliment Leonardo and the team at the India-Brazil Chamber of Commerce. It's an important event because this is bringing together two significant experts, two organizations, both from India, Chadda and Company, one of the most reputed legal firms in India, and also from Brazil, Siqueira Castro and our friends, together to have a conversation about how do we address this challenge of taxation. What has been India's experience in this field, and what are the experiences which India can share with Brazil? And ultimately, it is a conversation aimed at promoting the engagement between the private sector on both sides. We had two rounds of conversations in the past. One was between the Bar Association in India and the Brazilian Bar Association. The idea behind that conversation was to provide a better understanding of the legal framework which is existing between the two countries. And similarly, we had another meeting between our Ministry of Finance, the GST Council, and the Ministry of Economy of Brazil, in which we had a presentation made on the tax reforms in India. Now, when you look at today, one of the most important topics which has been in discussion in Brazil is about the tax reforms. There has been a demand from the private sector for expediting the tax reforms, and the government has made certain proposals which is under consideration in Parliament. In India, the tax reforms, it was not easy. It was a long journey. It took us almost a decade to reach where we are today. But we did succeed. We did succeed. And what was about 30 different taxes and cess, they were all combined into one. And more importantly, every month the businessman had to submit something like 300 forms to comply with each of the tax requirements. And today it has come down to one online form. So you could visualize in terms of the efficiency of the organization. You could visualize in terms of reduction in the cost of the organization. how much better they are of today, thanks to this tax reforms. And also, it has enabled more and more foreign businesses to come into India because now they have clarity on our tax structure. And I believe it is a question of time before Brazil also undertakes its tax reforms and providing greater clarity to the investors. And so I'm really happy that we are having this conversation in which we have the private sector is the ultimate beneficiary. And I look forward to supporting more such conversations in the future also. And I'd like to thank both Mr. Chadda and Mr. Agarwal from India for joining us today. And also from here, Mr. Siqueira Castro and of course, Mr. Musura Jr. for again joining us today and sharing their experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much. Now, for our start, I would like to call Mr. Chadda and Mr. Agarwal for their contributions. I'm going to stop my screen sharing so you can start yours.
Good morning, Your Excellency, Mr. Reddy, Siqueira Castro. My name is Chitranjan Agarwal. I'm with Chadda and Company. We're here from Delhi, and we are going to talk about doing business in India and tax reform in India. The GST, or the Goods and Services Tax, short form is GST, was enacted and brought into enforced on 1st of July 2017. So we have about 4.5 years now of this act. As the ambassador said, that about 30 odd taxes and cesses across the country were subsumed and coordinated into one tax. That is the beauty. So it became the key line with which the tax was launched was called One Nation, One Tax. And here we are going to talk about how GST came about, the key concepts. Important thing is the input tax credit, which is VAT, cross-channeling of VAT, key compliances under GST, and finally some changes that have also been made under direct taxes, which is corporate income tax. So let's start with GST. So GST is a comprehensive tax on goods and services. Very few items have been left out. It follows a dual structure where it is, if it is within a geographical area within the state, then we pay two kinds of taxes: central goods and service tax and state goods and service tax. But if you're sending goods or services from one state to another, then we end up paying IGST. There are very few exceptions or exemptions, unlike the other acts which were subsumed, where there were several exemptions or exceptions given. Some of the taxes subsumed were across states and central. As you can see, central excise duty, additional excise duty, service tax, additional customs duty. Amongst the state side, VAT, entertainment tax, octroi, purchase tax. A lot of these entries and levies were subsumed into one tax, which is GST. There are several rates of GST depending on the category of the good. You can have exempted goods, you can have nil rated goods, which is 0%. You can have goods at 5%, 12%. The most popular is 18%. And then there is, of course, a sin tax at 28%, right? So the need for GST was all these taxes for a particular company were brought together into one act, and the kind of compliances that were required were reduced from about 300 to, as we'll see, about 4 or 5, depending on the category of taxpayer that you are. I think there was a problem here. Okay. So under the previous regime, as you can see on this slide, there are several taxes which got converted into one rate, one tax. Key concept. So levy of GST is something that we'll talk about. GST is charged on the person supplying the goods, but there is also a provision called the reverse charge mechanism, which we will talk about, where the recipient has to pay tax, right? It extends to the whole of India, and it is applicable on the timing. It's also, timing is important as to when is GST applicable or to be paid, right? And the place of supply will determine what kind of tax is applicable. So these are the basic foundations on which GST is structured. So supply of goods, place of supply within India, outside India. If it is within India, it can be interstate or interstate. If it's outside India, it can be exported with or without bond. If it is exported without bond, which is then duty is payable, which is IGST is payable. If it's under a bond, then there is zero export GST. So a lot of companies in India are exporting under bond and paying zero duty on the export. So which is a huge benefit for Indian exporters from that perspective. So this is a legal definition of supply. The important part over here is that it has to be in the course of furtherance of business. That is the critical thing. So any personal transactions that people will undertake, that will not be liable to GST. It is only for the furtherance of business that is applicable, right? There are various schedules also, which are just 3 schedules over here. Activities to be treated as a supply, whether of goods or services, to be determined as per schedule 2, even if made without a consideration. So even if there is a business transfer and you do not receive any money for it, it will be treated as a supply under GST. Schedule T2 talks about what is to be, so there could be a conflict whether this is going to be a supply of goods or services. Schedule 2 clarifies that. And Schedule 3 says that these are neither goods nor services, therefore no GST is applicable to them. So this is an important concept for you to understand if anybody is doing business in India, whether what kind of product line they will be, whether there will be a GST for goods or for services. Okay, we're going to talk about a very important thing here, which is very unique to India. It's there in Australia also, I think, if I've read up correctly, but this is called reverse charge mechanism, where the service or recipient of the service will pay tax. This is usually applicable in import of services. So if an Indian company were to import, say, technology from Brazil, the Indian company would be liable to pay an import IGST on this under reverse charge, and later credit is available for that, right? It is extended to goods also, because under goods, when we are importing, we have to pay a customs duty. On that, we have to pay IGST as well on the assessable value, right? Mandatory registration is required. So if you're not required to be registered otherwise, but if you're paying tax under reverse charge mechanism, you are required to pay. There was another provision which has been deferred under GST, which was that if you're buying goods above a certain value from an unregistered dealer, you would be required to pay tax under RCM. That has been deferred indefinitely because there was some challenges in implementing that, right? Some examples of services on which RCM is applicable, and I'm spending slightly more time on this because this is a very important concept. RCM is something that businessmen deal with on a day-to-day basis in India. Supply of services on a goods transport agency. So anybody paying freight may have to, for goods coming in or going out, RCM may be applicable. Supply of services by advocates. So people like Mr. Chadda and I don't have to pay GST. It is the service recipient, our client, who ends up paying GST over there. Sponsorship. So if any thing is sponsored, then the sponsor pays the GST and not the person receiving the sponsorship money. Services by a director of a company to a body corporate. Again, if a sitting fees is paid for attending meetings or anything by the company to the director, this is applicable under RCM. Supply of services by an author, a musician, a photographer, artist, etc. Again, RCM, because the reason for this is that at times these people may be small service providers and they may not be able to comply with all the regulations under GST. Therefore, this benefit was given, and large companies then pay this tax, and then they receive a credit. Import of service is an important aspect, where any services, like I said before, imported, a GST is payable under RCM. Next, we want to talk about place of supply. So GST, whether you will apply IGST or state CGST, is to be determined where the supply is happening. There are these things we look at is when provided location of the person receiving it and location of the service provider in all other cases, right? Where it's goods with movement or without movement, whether goods assembled and installed at a site, delivered by A to C on the direction of B, or which are taken on board a conveyance. So all these various combinations are there. These are addressed to with various notifications, etc. And there is absolute clarity available and applicable on how this is to be taxed. Now for exports, like I said, this is usually exempt. People use the bond service, but goods imported into India, location of the importer exported is not applicable. Value of supply, how do we value what is taxed? Again, what is the value on which tax is payable? Invoice value or open market value? Again, is a supply of like quality available? So between related party and unrelated party. So the first on the left is unrelated party, the first green box you see. So it is at invoice, but if it is to a related party, then is open market value available? If it is available, then that is the taxable value. If not, is supply of like quality available? If not, it's 110% of cost. Otherwise, the open market value. So they've kind of addressed related party issues over there as well. Input tax credit is again an important part as to what credits are available. There are certain important credits which are not available under section 17(5). Certain activities on immovable property, or there are certain issues with respect to vehicles that people buy. Admissibility of credit and what are inadmissible credits. I think this is too detailed for us to attend and understand, but we are always available to answer your queries on this. Key eligible inward supplies. So one thing is there that for food and beverage, any supply of food and beverage that you take is usually not available. Anything for personal consumption is not available. Gifts of free samples that you may give to anyone, again, credits are not available. So these are known as block credits, and these are not available. Registration, this is important. So who's required to register? Anybody with a turnover selling goods with a annual turnover in excess of 4 million Indian rupees, and anyone providing services in excess of 2 million Indian rupees, their compulsory registration is required. Registration is based on a state in which you are located and is PAN based. PAN means permanent account number allotted by the income tax department, which is the direct taxes department. They allot a permanent account number to everybody, and on that basis it is allotted. So it is linked to that. Upon registration, you are allotted a 15-digit GSTIN, which is the basis on which you interact with the department. So returns. Now this is a list and a due date list of these returns, but the important ones are GSTR1, which is filed monthly or quarterly depending on your turnover threshold. So if you have a turnover of in excess of 50 million rupees, then you will file it monthly, otherwise it is quarterly. GSTR3B is again filed to paid GST for the month, and then there is 2A and 2B details supplied and the input tax credit statement, on the basis of which you set off and reduce your GST liability for all the services or goods that you've received. There are various other things to be done on a monthly or quarterly, depending on the transactions you undertake. Also, there is a concept of TDS, which is tax deducted or tax collected at source. If you are an e-commerce platform, then this is mainly applicable. So we're going to talk about quick changes in the income tax rate. So the tax rate in India for direct taxes, and these are again recent reforms that have happened, is that the tax rate was 25% and 30% and 40% for foreign companies. However, from tax year 2019-20, the tax rate has been reduced to 22% for certain existing domestic companies. Of course, they have to forego certain tax holidays, depreciation, investment allowances, etc., that they were receiving. They've foregone that for a lower tax rate. Also, for manufacturing companies, the tax rate has been brought down to 15%, which is in line with the new OECD rules. Applicable surcharge and cess is there. This company there are, of course, some compliances or certain conditions that need to be met. The company must be incorporated after 1st October 2019 and commences manufacturing by 31st March 2023. That is the important baseline to check to be for this 15% tax. It should buy new machinery, it should not use used machinery, and it does not use any building which was previously used as a hotel or a convention center. Also, it should not be set up in a special economic zone. There are several other things, but the important thing is that development of computer software in any form or in any media is not considered manufacturing. So software companies have been lobbying for this. However, currently under the current laws, it is not considered manufacturing. So it has to be pure product manufacturing. So services or goods that are intangible, if they are manufactured, they will not be tantamount to manufacturing. The final point is that rollback of retrospective taxation, which was a very important thing for the government of India to do, and which was done in this current tax year. There was a retrospective tax applied by the previous government. It was known as the Vodafone tax because Vodafone was the first company on which it was applied. And it was applied retrospectively for a transaction they had undertaken, and the government came back and said, no, we will tax this transaction. It was sale of shares from one non-resident to another non-resident with substantial assets in India. And therefore, this government, as one of its major tax reforms that it had proposed, was rollback of this Vodafone tax. And this has been done away with and was under, and already two large tax disputes that India was facing internationally with Keynes and with Vodafone, they have been resolved. And, this is going to inspire a lot of confidence in the Indian tax regime, as it gives continuity and stability to what the government is doing. With that, I think my 15 minutes are up, and I would like to hand you over back to Natalia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agarwal. Thank you very much. It's very interesting to understand a little bit more about what has been done in India, and it's a lot of information, but it's very interesting to see the results that are coming out from it. Let me just share my screen once again. And now to hear from the Brazilian side, the perspectives for the reform for Brazil, I would like to call Mr. Mausi Fregonese for his presentation. Mr. Mausi, we cannot hear you.
Hello, everybody.
There we go.
Good morning, Your Excellency, Mr. Suresh Reddy. Good morning, Mr. Leonardo Ananda, President of the IBCC. Good morning, Mr. Chadda and Chidranjan Agarwal, Managing Partner and Partner of Chadda Co. Good morning, Natalia Rodrigues and Adler Martins from IBCC. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank IBCC for the invitation to be a speaker in this event, and also congratulations for choosing this topic. The timing could not be better. We all know that in Brazil, there is an urgent need for tax reform, and nothing better to discuss tax reform than with our colleagues from India, a country that has made their homework, as we say, and implemented a very important tax reform in the recent 3-4 years. Why our tax? Can you just, yes. Yes. Why our tax system needs a reform? Well, first of all, our tax system is very complex. There are too many taxes, and worse, several taxes on consumption, indirect taxation. In other words, you do not have an European VAT, for example, and you have, let's say, 6-7 taxes on consumption, most of them levied by different public entities. So you have, for example, tax on industrialized products levied by the federal government, federal union. You have tax on commercialization of products levied by the states, tax on services levied by municipalities, tax on financial operations, and also PIS and COFINS to social contributions on invoicing. So, this whole of taxes, as well as the the taxable events that each one of them foresee, it brings a very complex system. As well, we have our tax system, I would say, that is very burdensome, not only because of the high taxation on corporate operations, for example, but also because all the obligations that is required by tax authorities for the taxpayer to comply with the respective legislation. So I would say that every year, the companies in Brazil, doing business in Brazil, they spend a lot of time just to fulfill the ancillary obligations required by tax authorities. And all this I have, very basically said here, brings, of course, a lot of uncertainties. We call here legal uncertainties on which tax should be levied on a certain situation. And also just to check whether the taxpayer is acting according to law. But at least I would say that in the last years, we have some line at the end of the tunnel. In the last 2-3 years, Congress prepared 2 main projects. One by the House of Representatives, which we call here by the acronym PAC 45, PAC because it's a project to the constitutional amendment, and another one prepared by the Senate, PAC 110. And finally, I would say from last year, the federal government also proposed 2 projects in terms of tax reform. In fact, I would say that we were unfortunate by the pandemic also in this respect. I would say that if it weren't for the pandemic, perhaps it would have moved a lot further than we have in terms of tax reform. So the proposition from the federal government, despite the fact that it was the last one, I would say that is the one that moved further. We had an important event on September 3, 2021, as was approved in the House of Representatives and moved to the Senate. And what these projects propose? They propose the reform of tax system into 4 stages. So the first stage is the creation of a federal VAT. So what it's being called Contribution on Goods and Service, CBS. I would say that's just similar to the GST in India at the rate of 12% to replace PIS and COFINS. At the second stage, it proposes the reduction of corporate income tax. Our tax as I said, our taxation on corporate revenue is high at the moment. We have 15% plus an additional 10% and plus another social contribution at the rate of 9%. So this would reduce the main tax of our corporate tax from 15 to 8%. And an important point which has brought a lot of discussions here in Brazil is that this project foresee the return of the taxation on the distribution of dividends. It's important to mention that Brazil does not tax dividends. So regardless the location of the beneficiary. So in other words, a Brazilian company that distributes or a Brazilian subsidiary that distributes dividends to its headquarters in US, in India, or in other countries is not taxed in Brazil. And even if, of course, it distributes here in Brazil. So this is an important change that has been proposed. And it, as I said, has brought a lot of discussions here. In the third and fourth stage, the respective projects have not yet been submitted, but we know that one of them implies the unification of the IPI the tax on industrialized products, which is levied by the Federal Union, as well as EOF, tax on financial operations, unification and the creation of just one to include all these ones I mentioned. And the fourth stage is predicts the increase in the list of the payroll exoneration. In Brazil, we have the social contribution on payroll, and I would say, as from 10 years ago, we have had some exoneration systems for some economic sectors, and which brings down the final taxation on payroll by changing the payroll as a taxable event to the revenue, but on a very, very little percentages. So this is something that is always welcomed by the taxpayer in Brazil, and this is what the government intends to do. As I said, this project was discussed and voted and amended in the House of Representatives in beginning of September this year, and moved to Senate. We don't believe that will be, well, it's impossible to be voted in the Senate. The reporting senator already said that he has no rush to discuss this project, as it is involves a very comprehensive change in our tax system. So we believe that this will be discussed next year, especially in the first semester. We do have elections in the second semester next year, October. So we believe this could be discussed and moved on at the beginning of next year. And the other two projects I mentioned earlier, the one from the House of Representatives and the other from the Senate, basically they establish the unification or the replacement of several taxes by just one, a tax that is being called IBS, tax on goods and services. One of them intends to replace 5 taxes and the other 9. So basically it's just a way of simplifying our tax system and avoiding a lot of discussions that we'll have here at different levels of public entities. And also both projects intend to create what we've been calling the selective tax, similar to the excise tax in the US, in Europe, to certain products, either to promote or to avoid the consumption, for example, cigarettes, tobacco, and other products. Both of these projects, the PEC 45 and PEC 110, is still under discussion at their respective houses. And because of the government proposals, I would say that both projects have been stalled and giving place to the discussions of the federal government proposals. So, having said this, what is we believe are the obstacles to an immediate tax reform? As I said earlier, I would say that the pandemic added an important factor to that, not just because everybody in general and the government in particular had to face a lot of other problems or urgent problems in other areas, economic situation, for example, and also increasing the expenses, that's the public expenditures, in order to help people in extreme need. So this is something that's I would say that has brought a lot to in order to postpone this our tax reform. Also, and very linked to this first point, also I would say that there are a lot of uncertainties about the neutral economic and financial impact of a tax reform. It has been said and understood. Everybody is very much aware of the fact that we cannot have an increase in taxation in Brazil, but at the same time, having a reform so comprehensive, of course, it's difficult, if not impossible, to guarantee that no tax increase will be produced. And also, as I said, considering all the extra and high expenses of the federal government, considering the pandemic, at the moment, I would say that public finances are very, very, I would say, unstable, and therefore, I would say that it's important for the country first to organize its finances rather than moving into a tax reform. And also another obstacle that I see is the fact of our, just like in India, and by the way, congratulate for everything you have achieved in terms of tax reform. We are a federal state, and you have a lot of frictions between municipalities, state and federal government regarding tax reform, because each entity is afraid of losing public revenue, losing any kind of revenue with this reform. And also, an important point is that at least those two projects I mentioned proposed by the House, by the Congress, they establish, because of the change in the system, they establish a very long transitional period. One of them, for example, established a transitional period of 15 years, the other one 50 years, so 15 and 50. And we believe that considering all this together, you have a very complex transitional period. So in this respect, the experience of India is very, very important for us, because they managed to combine local experiences and peculiarities with an unified and central government. So this is quite for us, this Indian experience. I believe this is what I would like to say. Unfortunately, it's not as attractive in terms of investment as our colleagues from India said, but we, despite everything, we haven't seen a great decrease in investments in Brazil, despite this I have just said, because you have other situations, and the currency at the moment, for example, is very attractive for investments. And also, despite all I said, we do manage to build a very good and secure tax regime for the investors, for foreign investors in Brazil. I think this is what I would like to say so far, and I give it back to you, Natalia. I don't know in terms of time. I think it's, yeah.
We're still on track. Thank you so much, Mr. Mossi. Thank you. And before I call here Mr. Adler for our Q&A session, I just would like to point out something that you said that is very important, that we know that the reform in India cannot be exactly, played back in Brazil. There will be two different reforms, but we can look at the Indian experience and learn a lot from it, and perhaps would help us take hours forward as well here in Brazil. So, Mr. Adler, can you hear us?
Yes, loud and clear.
I'll pass it back. I pass it to you now for our Q&A session.
Excellent. Thank you, Natalia. Thanks, everybody. Excellent presentations. Mr. Raul Chadda, Mr. Mausir, it was very nice hearing you. Mr. Chitranjan Agarwal as well. Thank you. We have heard a lot, so I'll try to start putting things in perspective. So I'd like two questions first to Mr. Agarwal. So first, how is the distribution between states and municipalities and the federal government in India? Is it, because in Brazil, this is one of the main problems, and Mr. Mausir has pointed that very well, that one of the main problems we have to do a tax reform in Brazil is that our distribution of funds to the state entities, municipality, etc., states, is very disproportionate, and everybody's afraid of losing money to the federal government. So I'd like to ask, how is it could be to Mr. Chandha as well, either of you, how is the distribution of funds within the federal state in India? And also if the tax reform resulted in an increase of taxation, or if you have managed to keep it, even lower it or keep it neutral, which is also a preoccupation Mr. Mausir has pointed out.
Thank you, Mr. Adler, for your question. So I will answer the second part of your question first. And, we, in spite of the lockdowns, in spite of the pandemic and everything, our tax GST collections have crossed record numbers. Okay, so collections have gone up because evasion, a lot of people used to evade taxes. Now they are not able to do so, or if they do so, they are quickly, because the system is so data driven, and the tax department is using a lot of AI and technology to try and figure out where evasion is happening, and they are able to pinpoint and then take penal action against those people. So therefore, in April we had a record high. In November we've had the second highest collection ever. So we are continuously in India, we are seeing what is known as buoyancy or increased collections month on month, year on year. And the government's target was, I don't know how much that is in dollars or millions, but 1 lakh crores was the target. And we've, over the last 6 months, consistently been doing that. And this year we were this month we were 31% above the target. So far as collections is concerned, single tax with lower compliances, people are happier doing that. That is the general feel, and it has given boost to trade and economy as well. That is why India is one of the largest, or probably is the fastest growing economy. Going back to your first question, how is the split? I think it's very even. The government, even though the federal government or the central government is collecting these taxes, the spread is fast and quick, and the government is, whether it's ruled by the ruling party or an opposing party, the states, it's evenly distributed. Some states collect more tax because the economic activity is there, like Maharashtra or Karnataka or Tamil Nadu. Some have always been collecting lower taxes because of size or lower GDP or whatever was happening in those states in earlier times as well. So therefore, it is played out very, very evenly, and we've not seen any inconsistency in that. So from our perspective, a single nation, single tax has added a lot of value to the country in every way.
Excellent, thank you. This is a great war you have in Brazil, and it's good to know that in India it worked out well, because the municipalities here are very afraid that they will lose all the money. So that's why I'm asking it. Thank you so much. The next question, I'd like to do it to Mr. Mausir. It came from our audience as a pre-registered question. And Mr. Mausir, do you think that even with the dividend over the taxation over dividends, that the tax reform will help attract more foreign investment?
Yes, I believe so. as you well said, even though the potential taxation of dividends, but I do believe that a tax reform would attract investments even more, because, as I said, we need to have a simplified tax system. It's not just a matter of increase taxation, which I said it's not the case, but to just simplify it will be cheaper as well for the investors and avoid some of the problems we have nowadays. So I thoroughly believe that a tax reform would attract investment, despite the fact that it may bring the taxation of dividends.
Excellent, excellent. The next question, it also came from the audience. It could be to Mr. Agarwal or Mr. Chadha. You have mentioned that India is now, I did not understand it quite well, to be frank. You said there is a tax provision regarding the transference of assets via offshore companies. You mentioned something about that. It caught my attention because the last project for reform, right, Mr. Mausir, it also has an article demanding taxation of indirect transference of assets and real estate. So, Mr. Agarwal or Mr. Chadha, would you please comment how it was implemented in India? Because it's something very similar to what we have in Brazil, or what we're going to have.
Very good question, Mr. Adler.
Okay, Rahul, would you like to answer that?
Why don't you go ahead? I'll come in after you finish.
Okay, so there was this provision for offshore transfer where, you know, one non-resident or one company which is not a tax resident in India transfers an asset which is substantially held by it, which is in India, to another offshore company. In India, there was no taxation in earlier days, and there was a certain transaction, two transactions, like I said, Vodafone and Keynes, that happened, in which most of the assets were in India, but an offshore to offshore transaction happened, and the interpretation always had been that there is no tax applicable on that, because this does not accrue or arise in India. However, the government in 2012 in its budget made a change and said that this is taxable in India, and it has always been so. So they brought in a retrospective amendment, and though these transactions had happened before 2012, they tried to bring them under the umbrella of this taxation, and this was a huge pain point in India for companies wanting to do business in India. And we lost about we must have lost a lot of foreign investment in India because of this. And there was uncertainty. And then the government, which is currently, at the center, made this one of their election plans, and they said that they will roll back this. But for subsequent transactions, this will be applicable. So they provided that clarity. So anything which was done historically, on which tax was not paid, will not be subject to this taxation. But anything done proactively or going forward, this would be subject to taxation. Rahul.
Yeah, so given the fact that a lot of multinationals investing in India were doing this by setting up special purpose vehicles in low tax jurisdictions, the frequency of such transactions happening was actually quite large. So what the government was trying to do was to essentially plug in this kind of a transaction. It was draconian in the sense that it was not expected. It was retrospective. It lent a lot to tax uncertainty. It also opened up transactions going back 50 years. So therefore, there were companies who were sort of in a soup, saying that, we've been investing in India using a particular structure, given a certain tax regime. So what the present government has done is, as part of its ease of doing business in India initiative, and taking advice from industry, which said that they're going to invest in India only if there is tax uncertainty. Only if the tax uncertainty is removed, they've come up with this initiative. there was an amendment that was made in the law. There were certain obligations on companies that applied to the government to make a settlement under this new law that were put forth. As you would imagine, because of the retrospective tax and the high tax levy that was imposed on companies, there were a lot of legal cases that opened up, and international arbitration was done in many of these matters. So what the government has gone out over there and said is that we will, as part of this amendment in the retrospective tax, we will settle all disputes. There will be an assurance that will be given by the companies that they will close all litigation and arbitration that is going on in respect to those taxes. So as Chitranjan mentioned, Vodafone and Kane are the first two companies that have made an application under the new law, and these disputes are expected to close very soon. So this has been received very, very positively by the international business community at a time where India is positioning itself as a major destination for investment. There are a lot of other initiatives that have been taken by the government. Make in India is one of them. There are also incentives that are being given under a product-linked incentive scheme to companies to move their manufacturing into India. So removing the tax uncertainty is expected to really give a push to investments under these schemes.
Excellent. To the benefit of our Brazilian listeners, I'll just do a quick summary in Portuguese, and I'll do the next question to Mr. Malcir em português, ok? Então, o Dr. Chadda e o Dr. Agarwal estavam dizendo que houve lá uma questão da reforma tributária, que teria uma tributação retroativa de algumas transações feitas na Índia via offshore. Isso gerou um mau resultado e foi revertido, então agora isso acabou. E eu aproveito a oportunidade porque na reforma apresentada pelo governo, há uma previsão semelhante aqui no Brasil, de que as transferências de patrimônio ou empresas feitas por meio de offshore seriam tributadas no Brasil. Hoje, basicamente, não são. E o Brasil tem muitos veículos de investimento assim, a pessoa faz uma offshore nas Ilhas Virgens, nas Ilhas Caimã, a offshore monta um fundo de investimento, o fundo de investimento adquire uma empresa ou vende uma empresa. Então, eu gostaria de perguntar para o Dr. Malcir se ele acha que essa tributação das transações via offshore se vai passar e qual vai ser o impacto aqui no Brasil.
In Portuguese or in English?
Acho que pode ser em português, para dar um alívio para os nossos amigos brasileiros.
Ótimo, perfeito. Bom, eu acredito que duas situações são possíveis. Primeiramente, haverá, como feito na Índia, todo esse respeito às operações pretéritas, então não haverá problema com operações já realizadas ou realizadas naquele ano. A gente tem um princípio aqui da anterioridade, então qualquer reforma nesse sentido fica válida para o ano seguinte. Além disso, eu imagino que haverá alguns ajustes, algumas emendas voltadas à atração de investimentos e, portanto, eu acredito que algumas situações hoje existentes podem ser mantidas, né? Evidentemente, a gente tem uma série de regulamentações específicas com relação a offshores situadas em jurisdição que tribute a renda abaixo de um determinado patamar, e aí você tem toda uma situação específica, mas, em geral, investimentos estrangeiros organizados via offshore, eu acredito que possa haver aí algum tipo de ajuste para evitar manter esses níveis de benefícios que existem hoje. Além disso, um aspecto importante na reforma tributária diz respeito ao tal dos benefícios fiscais estaduais. A gente sabe que nós temos uma série de benefícios fiscais concedidos por vários estados, também tem os benefícios fiscais federais, regionais, né, SUFRAMA, SUDENE, enfim, E nesses projetos, muito mais das vezes, se prevê a extinção desses benefícios estaduais. Eu imagino que, se isso ocorrer, eu acredito que possa haver aí um período de transição, algo que possa ser mantido durante um determinado período de tempo, sobretudo porque os benefícios fiscais concedidos unilateralmente pelos estados foram objeto de muita guerra fiscal entre os estados, mas que hoje, graças a uma série de mudanças que começou, por exemplo, com o Supremo Tribunal Federal, e essa questão hoje está um pouco mais apaziguada, com menos teor de insegurança jurídica. Então, eu acho que, de uma forma ou de outra, o Brasil sempre foi um país voltado a investimentos estrangeiros, né? Faz parte da nossa gênese até, né? Um país de imigrantes, enfim, de grandes parceiros. Eu acredito que sempre vai haver alguns movimentos e ajustes para que essa situação fique abrangida, fique resguardada.
Muito obrigado, Malci. Natália, acho que nosso tempo acabou, é isso?
É isso, infelizmente. Desculpa ter que interromper. Imagino que a gente possa ficar aqui a manhã inteira continuando esse tema. Vi que colocaram perguntas ali no chat agora. Eu queria encorajar todos que continuam ainda com dúvidas. Podem nos mandar as perguntas através do chat, que a gente direciona aos palestrantes depois, tá? Porque, infelizmente, a gente vai ter que encerrar aqui devido ao nosso tempo. Então, eu gostaria de agradecer imensamente, vou continuar no português agora também, já que já mudamos aqui, né, a língua. Gostaria de agradecer imensamente a participação dos nossos palestrantes aqui hoje, senhor Malci, senhor Adler pela moderação, muito obrigada, senhor Chadda e senhora Agarwal. E agradecer também ao time da Câmara por organizar esse evento aqui, o último evento do ano, que a gente conclui, ainda bem, com muito sucesso, num tema tão relevante. Então, assim, muito feliz por mais essa realização. Muito obrigada ao time da Câmara também. E agradecer a todos que estão aqui conosco, que participaram do evento, espero que tenham gostado. E deixar o convite para que sigam as redes sociais da Câmara aí. Esse é um tema que não se esgota aqui, né? Então, sigam acompanhando os canais da Câmara. Nós, com certeza, vamos promover não só esse tipo de discussão, mas muitas outras relacionadas à relação bilateral entre Índia e Brasil. Então, muito obrigada a todos pela participação e um excelente dia e excelente dia para o Brasil e excelente noite para a Índia. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leonardo, for the
It
invitation.
was a real great pleasure.
Namaste. Thank you very much. It was a very good debate. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Leonardo. Bye-bye.